Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is Sunday, February 15th, 2026, and you are listening/watching The Rundown, my sometimes weekly podcast where I talk about all things video games and pop culture. As always, I'm your host, Corrupt Ronin, and like I always like to say during the beginning of these shows, if you want to help support the show, there means to do so is through liking, subscribing, and commenting for those of you that might be watching this on YouTube, as I keep a lot of these archived on YouTube as well. Or if you want to help support monetarily, there is a tip button that you can find in the description or in the banners below on Twitch, and a Patreon that you guys can subscribe to as well. For those who do all of those things, whether it be through engagement on YouTube or supporting monetarily, I do appreciate the support, as it does go a long way and it gives me the ability to keep doing these. That being said, we got a lot to talk about today, and I'm going to try to keep this thing a bit concise for the sole purpose of it is my grandmother's birthday today, and I want to try to squeeze in some time to spend with her and my family while I still have it. So we're going to try to keep this thing as concise as I possibly can, which might be difficult to do considering how much I do have here to talk about. It's not a lot of different aspects of news to talk about, but we're going to go in depth into some of the topics that have happened over the course of the past week. Some things that are let's just say some things that are also important to me. With that being said, you guys know I'm going to talk about this Highguard stuff because the Highguard stuff is just the gift that keeps on giving. And I imagine when the game inevitably shuts down, it will continue to be the gift that keeps on giving. And I also want to talk about the Sony State of Play and two particular franchises that were talked about during that I want to get into and why there are a lot of concerns around both of those. Because I still feel like Highguard would have been fine if Jeff didn't hype it up. There's a part of me that somewhat blames Jeff for it, but I don't want to lie the problem solely at his feet for this whole thing. But I'll get into why with that in just a second here. I should just segue straight into that since we're already talking about it. Just segue in since we're already talking about it. So a few days ago, the news came out that a significant portion, we would say most of the staff at Wildlight Studios, the developers behind Highguard, were laid off. And there's probably what can only be described as likely a skeleton crew that's over there right now holding the game together. After this happened, one of the developers that were laid off took to Twitter/X a few days ago and wrote an article detailing his reflections on the journey leading up to release and the aftermath that followed once the announcement was made at the Game Awards. And basically, he got a lot of shit for this post. The problem is, and I put this thing together last night, of course, when trying to get all the news collated for this episode. When I put this together, I had bookmarked the article to talk about and read through for the show today. I woke up this morning to find out that the article was no longer in my bookmarks. Come to find out, the article was deleted. And I was like, oh shit, he deleted the article? What the hell? Already? But then I dug deeper and found out that he didn't delete the article. He deleted his entire fucking X account. And I have a theory about why that is, which I will talk about at the end of this segment, about why I think that happened. I have a theory as to why that happened. But so what I'm forced to do now is I have to rely on a third party, which is someone's video on X that kind of talked about it. Unfortunately, I can't have the audio from said video playing because I'm supposed to be commentating over this thing myself and not having the third party commentate instead. So I'm going to be doing this. You're going to be seeing a video through a video and me trying to go through it and talk about what this article said because the article no longer exists on X because the person deleted their account. Anyways, let's go to it. It says, my singular conspiracy theory, they blew all their money on Jeff hyping it up, didn't pay off, and they had to lay off everyone off since it didn't meet the hype. This is without me reading whatever article you're talking about. Oh, just trust me. It'll make sense here in a second. No worries. Some Raikou in the chat, by the way, who's watching this thing live. So the article is from calls himself his name is Josh Sobel, but he went by Joshy Poo on X/Twitter before he deleted his account. Anyways, and also this video is from Kyle on Twitter, by the way, who's been talking about the shit extensively. So I got to give credit to finding an archived version of this through a video on Twitter, but I want to give credit to the person who has this, which is Kyle on Twitter. Anyways. It's titled Reflecting on Shipping My First Game, Highguard. It says, apologies for the length, been wanting to say a lot of this for a while. The day leading up to the Game Awards 2025 was amongst the most exciting of my life. After 2.5 years passionately working on Highguard, we were ready to reveal it to the world. The future seemed bright. Everyone I knew who had any connection to the team or project had the same sentiments. This is lightning in a bottle. I trust this team wholeheartedly. If there's one project nobody in the industry is worried will fail, it's yours. This is mainstream hit written all over it. There's no way this will flop. I could play this game all day. I gotta scrub through the video to keep this thing going. Otherwise, it's a damn shame that it's come to this now. Anyways, it says the internal pre-reveal feedback, even from unbiased sources, was quite positive, and where it was negative, it was constructive and often actionable. People who played the game, including us, had a blast. And since we were independent self-published studio with royalties in mind, many of us were hoping this could finally be the thing that broke the millennial financial curse. My problem here is you guys went independent after coming from a studio who was making a live service game. The first thing you did was make an independent studio and decide to make another live service game. A foundation of game, which people say all the time is very difficult to break through and do successfully, and that was the first game you cranked out as an independent studio? People say all the time that live service games are some of the hardest types of games to launch, and the first thing you did as an independent studio was make another live service game. Anyways, continuing on. But then the trailer came out, and it was all downhill from there. Content creators love to point out the bias in folks who give positive reviews after being flown out to an event, but ignore the fact that their negative-leaning content gets 10 times the engagement of the positive. They've got just as much incentive to lean into disingenuous direction, whether consciously or not. So this is why we're broke. Basically, the restaurants of the gaming industry, pretty much. It's like when you launch a live service game, you got to be ready for the fact that this thing may never take off. It may never find an audience. It may never do any of that stuff. Now, what I find to be an issue that I have with this particular paragraph that I just read is that when it comes down to it, the content that gains traction is all based on whatever the sentiment is about such thing at the time. You take Baldur's Gate, for example. Baldur's Gate is beloved across the board. Making negative content about Baldur's Gate 3 is not going to get you views. Making positive content about how much you love Baldur's Gate 3 is going to get you a shit ton of views. The sentiment around Highguard was negative since day one. So is it a surprise that when everybody's thinking that this game looks like crap, the content that talks about the game looking like crap and why gets a lot of views? It's just don't know anyone who was hating on BG3. They weren't getting enough views. Exactly. If there are videos out there, people shitting on Baldur's Gate 3, I sure as hell haven't seen them. They haven't come across my timeline on YouTube or Twitter or any of that shit. That game is beloved across the board. When it comes to content, you could say that there's a bias because there's always going to be some type of bias when it comes to content creation or videos on YouTube, whatever it might be. But the reality is that a lot of that content bias comes from people that are all thinking the exact same goddamn thing. Sometimes people have an idea or a theory in their head, and they're curious about whether or not what they're thinking is the same sentiment across the board. And they find creators that are saying the same thing or saying things that they were not able to put into words themselves, and they gravitate towards that. Turns out the general gaming community as a whole, since the reveal of Highguard day one, all agreed that this game looked generic from the start. You can get mad at them for feeling that way, but that was the general temperature of how people felt about that game from the start. It was the same thing that happened to Concord when that was revealed. That state of play that showed Concord, the reaction was negative from the jump. Nobody had to create content making that negative. That was just a sentiment before anybody made any content about it. Like, I will never forget watching that and doing commentary over that stream. And then Fancy shows up because she missed a good portion of it. She shows up in the chat and asks what she missed. And I tell her another hero shooter on a PlayStation. And the first thing she said was pass. That was a knee-jerk reaction. And I consider her one of the most grounded, more sane people out there when it comes to stuff like this. So if her reaction was pass, then I know there's a ton of other people out there that felt the same way. Turns out that was true because the game flopped. It barely made 2 weeks. Vancy's the voice of the people. In this case, she was. And the reaction to Highguard was basically the same. People saw the trailer and said, "Are you fucking kidding me? This is it?" And they made it worse when they so proudly put on the screen, "From the creators of Apex Legends and Titanfall." Those are some large shoes to fill. You may as well be walking around with a big "kick me" sign on your back at that point. That's why I don't specifically blame Jeff Keighley himself for this, although I would argue that he may have had some influence over this, but this was not entirely him. Because no matter when this game got revealed, whether it was at the end of the show, the middle of the show, or the beginning of the show, the fact that it was there in the first place was already going to bring attention to it. And if the game was bad, which turns out people thought it was still going to be the case that this game would get ripped apart. But let's continue, because this thing is long. Like I said, I got to scroll through the video here, so give me a second. I'm doing this because like I said, I have to do this because apparently this article and the entire account that posted it has been deleted. So now I'm doing this through scrubbing through a video that used to have the article up. So just bear with me here. This is the choice that I have now. Because they should have saved their money on being at the Game Awards, dropped it, and got the feedback and fixed it. I mean, because a lot of people made the claim that, well, whatever, I'll continue. Because he's actually going to talk about that in this article here in a second. It says, the hate started immediately. In addition to dogpiling on the trailer, I personally came under fire due to my naivete on Twitter, which almost all of my now former coworkers had learned to avoid during their previous game launches. After setting my Twitter account to private to protect my sanity, many content creators made videos and posts about me and my cowardice, amassing millions of views and inadvertently sending hundreds of angry gamers into my replies. They laughed at me for being proud of the game, told me to get out the McDonald's applications, and mocked me for listing having autism in my bio, which I seem to think was evidence the game will be woke trash. All this was very emotionally taxing. The thing he talks about the McDonald's thing, and I'm pretty sure I know who posted that, which is also who I believe influenced the account getting deleted, by the way. But again, I'm gonna get into that. But I'll get into that by the end of this. Just bear with me here. Next paragraph. There's much constructive criticism that can be and has been said about Highguard's trailer, marketing, and launch. But I don't think it's my place to commentate on that. I also don't think there's any way to know whether the launch would have fared better or worse without the massive spotlight that was thrown onto us in response to the Game Awards trailer placement, but we never got that chance. This is a very passive way of saying that this was Jeff's fault, that part of this was Jeff's fault for the placement of the trailer at the Game Awards. He didn't want to say that outright, but this comes off as a passive way of trying to pass the blame onto Jeff for the reason why the game got so much negative attention. Which is, if that's the case, that is a very shitty thing to do. Like I said, I do blame Jeff Keighley for some of this, but I will not say that this was solely his fault, because it wasn't. It doesn't matter when this game would have been announced at the Game Awards, the beginning, the middle, the end. If it was bad, it was going to get called out for being bad. Well, yeah, I mean, because I guess I gotta keep reading because there's more to this. I was gonna talk about it, but I don't want to spoil the article before I get to it. Make sure I'm at the right place. Here we go. Says we were turned into a joke from minute one, largely due to false assumptions about a $1 million ad placement, which even prominent journalists soon began to state as fact. Within minutes, it was decided the game was dead on arrival, and creators now had free rage-bait content for a month. Every one of our videos on social media got downvoted to hell. Comment sections were flooded with copy-paste meme phrases such as Concord 2 and Titanfall 3 died for this. At launch, we received over 14,000 review bombs from users with less than an hour of playtime. Many didn't even finish the required tutorial. So, basically saying, and this was confirmed by Jeff himself, is that they didn't pay to have their game shown at the Game Awards. The reality is that Jeff saw the game ahead of time, and he liked it so much that he decided to put it on the show for free. So they didn't have to pay for the trailer or its placement. It was Jeff who decided that he liked the game so much, he wanted to show it off for free. So what was just smoking at the time? That's a great question. And to be fair, like I said, there's some blame that can be thrown in his direction because this was the guy who got on Twitter defending the game, and even kind of tempting people by saying like, oh, like when this game is shown, I'm going to be expecting it was when the game launches, I'm going to be expecting the apologies in my replies. As you can guess, he got none of that. To be fair, Jeff has been kind of a good sport about it since, as he's been kind of joking about people coming after him for this on Twitter, but he hasn't been like blaming people or getting mad at anybody about it. He's been taking it in stride, which, you know, good on him for not being mad about it. But still, Jeff, there's some of this can be placed on you as well. It's not entirely your fault, and I'll talk about why I don't think it is. But yeah, some of this lies at your feet, buddy. If you want to believe it or not. Anyways, the article continues. It says, in discussions online about Highguard, Concord 2XKO, which is the 2D fighting game that came from Riot Games, which, by the way, also saw layoffs as well after the launch of 2XKO because the game didn't do as well as they thought it would. So that's another game that's also experiencing some financial issues. Anyways, and such, it is often pointed out by gamers that devs like to blame gamers for their failures and that's silly, as if gamers have no power, but they do. A lot of it. I'm not saying our failure is purely at the fault of gamer culture and that the game would have thrived without negative discourse, but it absolutely played a role. All products are at the whims of the consumers, and the consumers put absurd amounts of effort into slandering Highguard, and it worked. The thing I take issue with this particular paragraph is that for the longest time, and this has been going on since the whole Gamergate incident back in 2014, where you had a concerted effort from journalists to effectively try to tell developers that, and I kid you not, this was one of the quotes that came from this. Let me find this right now. We're going to do this live on stream. This was back in 2014, where you had gaming journalists writing articles specifically saying that gamers are over and that gamers don't have to be your audience. And now a lot of people equated that to them trying to say that gamers were bigots and racists and all that stuff. But the reality is that what they were actually trying to say is that gamers and the gaming culture at the time was on its way out and that it was dying and that they had to find a new audience. They were trying to include things like people who played mobile games and Candy Crush on phones. They were trying to broaden the definition of what a gamer is. And the problem with that is that a lot of developers and a lot of publishers fell for that bullshit. They fell for 50% of gamers are also female, which has been proven time and time again to be absolute bullshit. And I've said it time and time again, that just because your mother or your grandmother plays Candy Crush on her phone does not mean she's going to suddenly wake up one day and be like, geez, I really love Candy Crush. Let me go ahead and play Dark Souls. That transition is never going to happen. That is why I don't include a lot of mobile gamers, especially based on the kinds of games, as gamers, because there's no guarantee you're going to get people like that to come over to playing big AAA titles on consoles or PC. It doesn't work that way. And there's been survey after survey after survey after survey that shows when breaking down the demographics of people that play video games today, a vast majority of them are male. That's not to say that female gamers don't exist. They absolutely do. I'm friends with many of them. But when it comes to video games, the demographic is still broadly, across the board, male. When Capcom released that survey they did months ago, showcasing that very same thing, where they showed the majority of people that participated in the survey were male. When there was a gacha game analytics that were broken down for several games like Genshin Impact and Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero and Wuthering Waves, you could go down that list of all those analytics based on demographic, and they found that the majority of people that played all of those games were still male. One thing I was surprised about, I don't have the statistics pulled up in front of me, and I kind of wish I did to talk about this, but one thing that surprised me is that a lot of people used to talk shit about Zenless Zone Zero because of how it sexualized and objectifies its female characters, right? But when looking at the statistics of that game of players broken down by demographic, I was surprised that 23% of the players that play that game are female. That was higher than a lot of the other games that don't sexualize their female characters to the same extent. I was like, weird. How is Zenless getting more female characters than the rest of these games? And it sexualizes its female characters the most. That was a weird one to me. That kind of shot me. I was surprised the number was that high. Turns out, I guess a lot of women like looking at pretty girls too. Color me shocked. I know. Anyways, a lot of this comes back to the fact that ever since Gamergate, there's been a concerted effort by journalists to try to diminish what gamers are and try to remove gaming culture or change what gaming culture is. Which is kind of why Gamergate started in the first place. Was that there was for one, it was the whole incident with Zoe Quinn basically sleeping with a reviewer to get positive reviews for her game. And that basically broke out the broader discussion of ethics in journalism about a conflict of interest when it comes to being truthful about reviewing games. And a lot of people caught on to that and made a big deal out of it. Fast forward to, let's say, maybe a couple of years ago, when there was rumors of the Gamergate 2 thing breaking out. One article talked about how gamers were smaller. I'm going to pull it up. I think this was by the Verge. The article was literally titled, "The Return of Gamergate is Smaller and Sadder." It says a group of gamers has mobilized a harassment campaign against the story consultant company, marginalized developers and journalists in protest of what they see as forced diversity in gaming. This was around the time when the discourse around Sweet Baby Inc. was coming into play, and the creation of curation pages on Steam like Sweet Baby Inc. Detected, which is now known as DEI Detected now. So basically they were trying to diminish the movement that was happening of gamers, not just but 2 years ago, realizing that there was something wrong with video games and making a big deal about that. Now, what I find to be hilarious when we go back to our article here from our now laid off developer, when he complains about how gamers have no power, but they do in a lot of it, is what I like to call, and this is what I've titled today's episode, what I call Schrodinger's gamer, where gamers simultaneously have the power to tank entire games and don't have the power to take entire games, depending on who hates the gamer at the time. So which one is it? Do we have the power to sink games or do we not? According to this guy, we do. The article continues. We're not done yet. Like I said, it's a long one. Many of Wildlight's former devs will now be forced to assimilate back into the actual corporate industry many gamers accuse Wildlight of being part of. Oh, this is still playing. My bad. Now, every time someone thinks about leaving the golden handcuffs behind in favor of making a new multiplayer game the indie way, they'll say, "Remember how gamers didn't even give Wildlight a chance?" Soon as this pattern continues, all that will be left are corporations, at least in the multiplayer space. Innovation is on life support. There's a couple issues with this. And I mentioned it earlier. That's where I said, you were an indie studio. You came from corporate. Corporate made a live service game called Apex Legends. If you helped launch that game, you knew at the time that there was a chance that game might not succeed at all, considering it was competing against games like PUBG and Fortnite. What made you think that building an indie studio, a much smaller team, and that the first game you would make is another live service game, and you thought to yourself that was going to work out? When you should have already known how hard it is to launch live service games and be successful? You jumped into the deep end of the pool without knowing how to swim and got mad because you were drowning. And even if you have to go back to corporate, there's a lot of indie developers out there making single player games and doing just goddamn fine. The gaming industry will be fine with or without you. That is a brutal reality that a lot of developers are going to have to face. Since you had to run away briefly, no worries. But yeah, the gaming industry is going to be fine with or without you. There are thousands of games released every single day. And this idea that people didn't give Wildlight a chance is absolute bullshit to the highest degree. In fact, the only reason why your game, because when the game launched, the game, at least on Steam alone, hit 97,000 players day one on Steam alone, a number that a lot of developers would kill to be able to reach. In fact, I'm pretty sure Code Vein 2 came out roughly around that same time vein, and you know Code Vein 2 didn't even hit those numbers? Didn't even get close. You guys hit 97,000 on day one. So where do you get this idea that no one gave you a chance? In fact, many of your detractors who were talking shit about the game from the day it was announced at the Game Awards, many of them played the game when it came out, some of which played for hours at a time, So where do you get this idea that no one gave you a chance? They gave you a chance, and they said they didn't like your game. And it was evident that people didn't like it because there was a sharp drop-off in player numbers the very next day. And you never recovered that. Because a lot of studios are going to sinks, and it sounds like they're banking on this game being a smash hit, which was insanity. That's what they were hoping on. Because they were relying on a very insulated circle. And that's one of the problems that these developers have today, is that they keep relying on very insulated circles of people who they think are unbiased. But the reality is that they all think the same way they do. A lot of people tend to call it toxic positivity, and there is a degree of that is 100% true. But even then, if you surround yourself with a circle of people who all think, act, and operate the same way you do, how is that truly unbiased? How do you know you're getting truly unbiased opinions about your game? And even worse, when you never once did a beta, an alpha, a playtest, none of that. You did none of that. You developed this game in isolation. And somehow you thought that developing it in isolation, where nobody knew what this game was or that it existed until it showed up at the Game Awards, and you're surprised that the gamers rejected it? Kind of weird for you to leave the audience that you're trying to find out when developing your game. But so apparently it's the gamer's fault that it's tanked. Yeah, apparently it is. Because we all rejected it. We said this is not what we want. And gamers have been saying for the longest time that this is not what we want. They've been saying that for the past 5 years. I don't know what's going on in this industry for the reason why they continue to not listen. I take it back. I do know why. I do know what's going on for the reason why they continue to not listen. It's because they surround themselves with the very kinds of people that push the same narrative. They surround themselves with the very same people that will turn around and write articles about how gamers are over, how gamers don't have to be your audience, and how Gamergate 2.0 is smaller and sadder than it was before. Those are your audience. Those are the people you keep associating yourselves with, who are completely out of touch with the general gaming community as a whole. The gaming industry is a fast-moving, constantly evolving, constantly changing one. And if you are not in a position where you can pivot, change, or adapt just as quickly, you are going to fail every single goddamn time. I'm not sure how you expect to make games that appeal to the audience when every time you're developing said game, you leave the audience out. When the audience is screaming at the top of their lungs of what they like and don't like, and you continue to ignore them. They definitely made something interesting, I'll say. Yeah. All right, so we're getting towards the end here. There's a little bit more. So scroll back up. Let's get down to the bottom here. Here we go. It says, even if Highguard had a rocky launch, our independent self-published dev-led studio full of passionate people just trying to make a fun game with zero AI. I don't know why you felt the need to put that, because like the zero AI thing is stupid. And I say this because the only people that really care that much about AI being in video games are people that are constantly online, chronically addicted social media users who care about that and will go out of their way to try to make you say that your game doesn't have AI to satisfy their own particular interests and is not guaranteed to buy your game. The reality is the majority of people do not care. The average person does not care whether it's AI or not. Zero AI and zero corporate oversight deserve better than this. We deserve the bare minimum of not having our downfall be gleefully manifested. The reason why it was gleefully manifested is because people have been saying for the top of their lungs for the longest time that this is not what they want. I wish the best of luck to those who remain at Wildlight and hope Highguard can stay the course. I still believe in it, and so do the fans we reached who continue to champion it on the subreddit, Discord, and Twitch. There you go. Remember that thing I said about them surrounding themselves with like-minded people that all think the same thing and never want to criticize them? Subreddit. We'll leave it at that. And social media. Even though this adventure has come to an abrupt and emotionally challenging close, I don't regret 1 second of it. Also, I just wanted to shout out some incredibly supportive journalists and creators who genuinely made a night and day difference in during the past 2 months. All of these folks deserve far more credit than they get for their empathy, intuition, and integrity. This section in particular is a problem. And it goes back, and it really does go back into the whole thing about why people have such an issue with gaming journalists and journalists as a whole. By every definition of integrity and conflict of interest, Here I was just watching you talking about the state of play. I'll get back in. I'll be getting into that too towards the end of the show here. But yeah. So by every definition of conflict of interest, journalists should really not be trying to go out of their way to quote unquote friendship a lot of developers, because that is indeed a conflict of interest, especially if you call yourself being a journalist of integrity. Not to say that being friends with people is a bad thing. It's not. But being friends with people also affects emotionally your interest in being objective and telling the truth. As a journalist, it is within your best interest to maintain a level of neutrality. And some of these names they have here in the ats are some people that I recognize. Keep scrolling up. So you have Khalif Adams. I recognize him. Miss 500 Watts, recognize her. There's a lot of people on this list. People that I recognize that call themselves journalists. Like, I understand the desire to want to help people that feel like their game is being attacked. But as a journalist, when you do that, you make it very clear where your biases are. And it puts your integrity as a journalist into question. And it should. But you have a lot of these people tell you what happened during Gamergate, and they'll say that it was a harassment campaign. Yet they continue to time after time after time prove that the problems that people had during the Gamergate era were actually true. Let's see. Was there any more than this? No, there was a little bit more towards the end here. It says the image below was drawn by me for the Tech Art team. I plan on printing it for us soon. Some of the best times of my life were spent with these people. It's kind of incredible to me because, like, they said that they were developing this game for at least 4 years, right? You developed this game in isolation for 4 years. But a lot of developers, and I notice this happens a lot. I notice this happens a lot, is that a lot of developers will try to use the amount of time they spend developing the game as a means to garner sympathy and empathy over their games to make sure that people don't come down quite so hard over it. When the reality is that a lot of people do not care how much time you spent on something. They just want a quality product. As brutal as that sounds, as heartless as that sounds, as cold as that sounds, the average person does not care. They don't care that you spent 5 years on it. They don't care that you spent 7 years. They don't care that you spent 8 years. They don't care. What they care about is the end product. And if it's not meeting the needs, they're going to throw it aside. And even more so when the competition out there is fierce in this space, especially when it comes to hero shooters. You have Overwatch, you have Marvel Rivals, and a lot of those people that decided to give Highguard a chance are the same people that are playing games like Overwatch and Marvel Rivals. And what I always say is, if they're not playing your game, they're playing someone else's. When those people tried out Highguard and played it and said it wasn't for them, what do you think they went back to? Overwatch and Marvel Rivals. Because those games were meeting the needs they were looking for. At which point, the minute they went back to those games, it was over for you. And that's why they never recovered those numbers after the first day of Highguard's launch. It's not that people didn't give the game a chance. They did. They gave you a hell of a chance. Even the biggest detractors gave the game a chance. You had 97,000 players on day one on Steam alone. And my policy when it comes to stuff like that is that when it comes to player numbers, I like to use the Steam number and then multiply that by 2 or 3 times for the consoles, because the console install base, at the end of the day, more people still play on consoles. So you had a considerable number of people that played this game. It was free to play. On top of that, it's not that no one gave it a chance. A lot of people gave this game a chance. They just didn't like it. You made a mid-game. And while this article tries to be objective in the sense of saying like, well, you know, we kind of blame it at Jeff, we kind of blame it at the gamers, but we also take responsibility ourselves. This article still reads like someone who is blaming the rest of the world for their problems. It's not a reflection when you don't take accountability for yourself. And a lot of developers will try to use the you don't understand game development or how hard it is or how long this stuff takes and stuff like that as a means to basically discredit gamers as being ignorant of what the process is. And I really hate that because while they tried to garner sympathy and try to get gamers to understand, what I have noticed, especially over the past few years, is that a lot of developers still try to hold this air of, because I make video games, I know more about video games than you do, therefore your opinion is not as valid as you think it is. I'm not saying all developers have this mindset, but there's still very much a very tangible air of that around a lot of developers these days. I make video games, you don't. Therefore, I know more about the process and know why our game is good, and you don't know why our game is good. Our game is good, and if you don't like it, too bad. And it's because of that mindset that a lot of developers out there refuse and write off a lot of feedback. He complained about how a lot of the reviews were people that had less than an hour of playtime. I'm sorry, but in the era of TikTok, where attention spans are at an all-time low, you asking for an hour of playtime is asking a lot. Most of them didn't even get past the tutorial. Was your tutorial good? Or was it too long and boring? No one is obligated to play through a game for a certain amount of time before coming to an opinion on it. That is very much a policy that is not true. Also, why in God's name would somebody spend more time playing a game they don't like? If I don't like this game, why would I spend more time playing it? If I don't like it, I don't like it. I'm going to put it down. Some developers out there will try to make their tutorials extremely long because now that they understand the whole refund process, especially on Steam, where you have 2 hours, where you have a 2-hour time limit before you can refund a game and get your money back. And a lot of developers, I'm noticing now, are trying to drag out that time with extremely long tutorials, and which is also very annoying. I said this a long time ago that there are a lot of games that I've played where I'm like, ooh, I used to like playing this game a whole lot. I remember enjoying this game when I first played through it. I want to play it again so I can get some sort of joy that I had the first time through out of it again. So you load the game up and you're thrust into a 2-hour long tutorial, sometimes longer. And by the time you finish said tutorial, you are exhausted with the game already. So you turn it off. And part of the reason why these games have such long tutorials is because they fit the tutorials in on the story, which makes them basically unskippable. And by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, all right, I got my fill. I'm done. Turn the game off. That's it. So you barely even get to the meat and potatoes of the game before you're tired of playing it. I'm trying to think, have I played any good games with a tutorial that long that isn't a JRPG? Yeah. Good luck with that one. Remember, I went back and played Horizon Forbidden West again. This was like a year or so ago. I tried to play through that again. And you had to go through the whole tutorial process. And, oh my God, by the time I got past the tutorial, when they finally put you in the open world, the open world, I was already done. Because you have the tutorial, and then you have like the open world before the open world section of it, like before the game really opens up. And that's about a good 4 to 5 hours long with just that by itself. So you got the tutorial, which is like an hour, to 2 hours long. And then the tutorial area, that's the open world before the open world, that's about a good 4 to 5 hours long. And then the game finally opens up. I can never get to that part of the game because by the time I get halfway through the area before the big open world, I'm already exhausted. I don't want to play anymore. Like, I'm over it at that point. I got my fill. And it's a lot of story games that do that too. Like a lot of story heavy games that do that, where the tutorial is built into the story. And by the time you finish playing through that, you don't want to play anymore. If there is one thing I will give a lot of older retro games credit for, is that the moment you press the start button, you are playing the goddamn game. You get to the title screen, you press start, you're already in it. And the advantage of that was the fact that the game's mechanics were simple enough that you could learn as you go. But nowadays, a lot of games are featured with what I like to call mechanical bloat, which then leads to hours-long tutorials because now you have to explain every aspect of every mechanic you put in your game. Every gimmick, every mechanic. Because you're afraid that if your game is too shallow, people won't like it. So you keep piling on mechanics after mechanics after mechanics. Yeah, that shit is exhausting. That's Highguard in a nutshell. Like you'd say, it's unfortunate what's happened to them, and it kind of is. Like I'm not here to celebrate anybody's downfall. Other people can do that. Losing your job sucks. Getting laid off sucks. I understand that. when you continue to develop yourselves in insulation or in isolation from what the general gaming community has been talking about, completely ignoring gaming discourse when gamers have been saying at the top of their lungs what they want for the past 3 years now. Don't be surprised when people are praying for your downfall, because you made it very clear that you don't care what they want, especially in an industry that has been actively hostile, developers and journalists alike, actively hostile towards this audience since 2014. And now you're shocked that no one has any sympathy for you. Unfortunately, the mistakes are going to continue. Like I said 3 years ago, I said when the layoffs were hitting an all-time peak, I said the layoffs are going to continue. Was I wrong? And a lot of it is really just concentrated here in the West. Like when you break down a lot of the layoffs that have happened over the past year, I believe it said it was like a third of the layoffs that happened in the industry were here in the West. Over 30%. That's crazy. Like you don't hear that shit happening all that often over there in the East. Korea's not having that problem. Japan's not having that problem. China's not having that problem. So who's having that problem? The West is. Not saying correlation equals causation, but there's a very obvious pattern that you can find here with a lot of Western games as to the reason why they continue to fail. And the problem is that I don't think anybody here will really open up to see it. Maybe there'll be a few developers out there, like let's say the Lords of the Fallen developer, CI Games, for example, which I saw the recent gameplay trailer for that they put out for Lords of the Fallen 2, and I'm gonna be honest, that game looks kind of awesome. I'm gonna be honest, the gameplay trailer they put out for that, it looks really fucking cool. But a lot of that came from them listening to the feedback that the players have been giving them, where the CEO of the company himself went out on Twitter and said, guys, we're making Lords of the Fallen 2, but instead of going through the journalists, we're going to ask you guys directly what you would like to see in the sequel. And from what they've shown so far, from the gameplay footage, it appears they are listening. So the first Lords of the Fallen was so bad I didn't even look at the reboot. The reboot was pretty decent. It was like I wouldn't say it was great, but it was decent. Definitely some issues that game had that they tried to work out over time. But I think them making the sequel has given them the reset they needed to finally go through and fix a lot of the issues that people had with that first one. And based on what I've seen of the combat so far, from the alpha gameplay they showed, like that came out a couple days ago, they've taken a lot of that feedback to heart. And all of that came from them simply talking to the consumer, not ruling anybody out based on whether or not they hate their politics or hate what they say as gamers or think they're just a bunch of none of that. They said, okay, we're putting ourselves out there. We're on Twitter. What do you guys want to see? Do you want to see masculine characters? Fantastic. We're putting them in. Do you want to see sexy female characters? Fantastic. We're putting them in. A lot of developers are not going to take that mindset, because that's what happens when you have an industry that is actively hostile towards its consumers. And like I mentioned earlier, you have developers that have the air about themselves that because they're the ones who make video games, they know the ins and outs of it, and that the gamers themselves don't know shit. I make video games, you don't. Therefore, your opinion is invalid. I said, I'm the wrong person to ask for feedback. I just want a good game. Well, we have to ask you what makes a good game to you. If you can answer the question of what makes a good game to you, then there's your feedback that you can provide. You got feedback and you didn't even know it. So Highguard is very likely going to shut down. Like they still haven't recovered any of the numbers that they've had since launch, and that game continues to hover around anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000 players on Steam by itself. And I'm sure that number is much lower on other platforms, or just as lower on other platforms. So that game, within the next few months, let's say 3 months, you'll be hearing about Highguard shutting down. Like I said, I had to go through this article from a third-party source because, the person who posted this, they deleted their account and the article itself. And I said I was going to talk about what the theory that led me to believing that. So let me get into that. So apparently today, I was seeing some news on X that Asmongold had reacted to this article. He did that yesterday. Let's just say he wasn't very nice in his reaction to this article. From the clips that I've seen, let's just say he wasn't very nice about this article. And when you have somebody like that with millions of subscribers and followers on Twitter, you can imagine what will happen when somebody like that catches wind of your article and starts talking about it. And I believe that was the catalyst to this guy ultimately just deleting his entire account on X, which is why this article can no longer be found. Because the crazy thing is that this thing had been up for like a couple days. Like I think he posted this on the 12th, and yesterday was the 14th. And that's when I caught wind of it and tried to add it for the news today. So it was still up yesterday. And then suddenly today it's just gone. The whole account is gone. But yesterday was also when he reacted to it. So now, and now today it's gone into the ether. So that's why this whole thing has been kind of awkward, because I had to watch a third-party source go through the article so I could actually read through it for you guys to know what he said, because the evidence is gone. But anyways, let's get into our next bit of news here, which revolves around the Sony State of Play. During said State of Play, they showed off a wide variety of games. The thing was over 60 plus minutes long. They showed a variety of games from Kena 2 to the Metal Gear Solid Collection Volume 2, which features Metal Gear Solid 4 and Peace Walker. And then they showed off, let's see, a bunch of middling games that no one cared about. They showed off Beast of Reincarnation, which is the Game Freak game that they've been working on that looks strangely like a mix of Sekiro and Nier combined, which looks kind of cool if I'm going to be honest with you. But then some reveals happened towards the latter half of the show. One of which was Team Ninja revealing the return of Dead or Alive. Says Game Freak, really? Yeah, Game Freak making something other than Pokemon for once, guys. It's not the first time they've done it, but it's very rare when it happens. Game Freak making something other than Pokemon. And I'm going to be honest, it looks pretty decent from what they've shown so far. A little bit framey, though, which means that game's probably going to run like shit when it comes out, unless they optimize it. It's out in August. I think they said August 2nd of this year it'll be out. All right, so basically Team Ninja came out and revealed the return of Dead or Alive, where they're re-releasing Dead or Alive 6 Last Round on for modern hardware. And for the most part, for a lot of people, this seemed like exciting news. Like, oh my God, Dead or Alive is finally returning, right? And to be fair, I kind of saw this coming because once Stellar Blade came out a year or two ago, and they were starting to catch wind of people liking basically sexy female characters, there was a post by somebody who was a representative at Koei Tecmo asking if people wanted to see, a return of Dead or Alive. Now, the Stellar Blade kind of brought back the whole idea of appeal. And the reaction they got was, yes, we'd like to see that happen. And they were pretty much quiet since then. So here we are today with Dead or Alive returning yet again with the re-release of Dead or Alive 6 Last Round. This came out last gen on the PS4 and Xbox, blah, blah, blah. It was the one with the sweaty disc at the time. But one of the issues that people had with this, and this kind of took off with Dead or Alive 5, is that the developers at the time were of the idea that they wanted to tone down the sex appeal in the game because they wanted people to take Dead or Alive more seriously. So a lot of the costumes and stuff like that were some would define as skimpy and so on, they very much nerfed a lot of that. And there was kind of the big issue of people complaining about that. And one of the reasons why they did that is because they were trying to effectively placate to the journalists at the time who had issue with that. And I kind of date this whole thing back to that one. For the sake of finding it, hold on. Now that I'm mentioning it, I should probably just show it on screen. That one talk at the legendary game developer, at the legendary GDC, from the one and only Neil Druckmann of the Last of Us fame himself. So I can find that now. We're doing this shit live. Hold on. Here we go. Oh, I forgot that he used her too. Wait a minute. Holy shit. I thought it was just those two. Apparently it was 3 different characters. So this was a relatively recent GDC that happened when he did this. So there was a GDC that Neil Druckmann was at, and he basically shit on the designs of female characters in video games following Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, which you see here, this Quiet on the screen. Which Quiet, that was a whole controversy in itself that I'll probably talk a little bit about as well. So it's Quiet, it's Cortana from Halo 4, and it's Ayane from Ninja Gaiden 2. For those who don't know, Ayane is also a character in Dead or Alive. Now you can imagine that news of this made its rounds to a lot of developers in the industry when this happened. This was him complaining about the objectification of female characters in video games. This was at a GDC many years ago. So you have to give me a sec, because it's going to be kind of a busy day considering it's my grandma's birthday today. So the phones are blowing up and everything else is going on right now. So yeah, basically he was shitting on the female character designs in a lot of games, from the Cortana design in Halo 4 to Quiet in Metal Gear Solid 5 and Ayane and Ninja Gaiden 2. And like I said, developers, obviously this is a game developers conference where developers from all over the world come to basically talk about video games, designs, philosophies, the list goes on. So it would be no surprise that this news and this particular conference made its way back to the folks in Japan at Team Ninja, thinking to themselves, oh, well, it turns out the West doesn't like our game designs, our character designs, so maybe we should tone that down a bit. And so they did with Dead or Alive 5. And come to find out, people were pissed. Because at the end of the day, people understand who know Dead or Alive. People understand what Dead or Alive is. And before all of this, Dead or Alive used to be known as the franchise that was very unapologetic about what it was, about what it is and what it was. Team Ninja at the time was very unapologetic about who they were and what they made. And I don't say that just because they made Dead or Alive what it was. I also say this because this dates back before the return of Dead or Alive. We took it all the way back to Ninja Gaiden 1. The reboot of Ninja Gaiden on the original Xbox. Which, at the time, before Dark Souls ever came into the picture, was known as one of the hardest video games ever made. And the Team Ninja back then that made that didn't give a fuck what you thought. They were unapologetic about it. Either you get good or you just don't play it. Period. In fact, they were so unapologetic, they gave so little of a fuck that after the original Ninja Gaiden came out, they released a new version of that same game called Ninja Gaiden Black, which was harder than the original. Then Ninja Gaiden 2 came out, and they proudly heralded the idea of it being the most violent, fast-paced action game ever made, and it was. It was very gory. It was very violent. On the original Xbox, it was at least. Or on Xbox 360 is when it came out. On Xbox 360 is when Ninja Gaiden 2 first came out. After that, it was Itagaki who revealed that he was going to be leaving Team Ninja because of some internal disputes that happened at the company about people not getting paid. That's right, the Ninja Gaiden. Everybody's favorite, Ninja Gaiden. That's right. So the internal drama happened at the studio, which eventually led to him leaving the studio and forming his own. But since that happened, it felt like the entire dynamic of Team Ninja shifted from being unapologetic to being very apologetic and even squeamish. How do I know? Because right after he left, they decided they were going to re-release Ninja Gaiden 2 on the PS3 in the form of Ninja Gaiden Sigma 2. The big difference there was that they effectively nerfed and censored all the gore and violence. Now, instead of fountains of blood that came out of severed limbs, you got purple and green mist instead. That was the beginning of the shift in direction for Team Ninja as a whole. Following that was the toning down of the female characters in Dead or Alive. And to make matters worse, it's that the person who heralded the studio after Itagaki left just so happens to be, let me pull this up because this is where it gets more interesting, just so happens to be the very same person who went on stage and talked about the return of Dead or Alive during the State of Play. And what people noticed about this particular individual was the pins he was wearing on his vest at the time. Now, this has been unverified, but people are connecting dots. The pin he wore is not a pride pin. It is an ESG pin. For those who don't know, ESG stands for Environmental and Social Governance. ESG. The idea is that your studio or your company, whatever it might be, has to meet explicit goals met by that were required by either people at the United Nations or the WEF, the World Economic Forum, also heralded by Bill Gates. Don't get me started on that one. Don't get me started there. Invested in by companies like BlackRock and Vanguard. Effectively, the idea is that your company has to effectively meet the goals you see on screen right now. Meet those goals or get close to meeting said goals. And if you don't, whatever investment you might be getting you won't be getting. For those who don't know, ESG is part of what gave birth to DEI. So you can imagine, for all the folks that have had issues with how things have been going over the past few years, they connected the dots. So people have a lot of concerns about Dead or Alive returning because of the history of the franchise leading up to this point. How the studio went from a studio that was once unapologetic to very apologetic. And now seeing this as well, which gave birth to the very issues that people have in the industry today. And you can see why people don't have a lot of confidence in Dead or Alive returning. Even more so when you consider that there's a good chance they're going to want Dead or Alive 7, the new one they're working on, which they also announced at the State of Play this year. Even more so when you consider that they announced a new Dead or Alive at the State of Play this year, which they haven't called Dead or Alive 7 yet, but it's likely going to be Dead or Alive 7. They're going to want this game to make its way to the FGC. Let me just go ahead and switch this out so you guys can see it. They're going to want this thing to make its way to the FGC. This is the same FGC where someone effectively got in trouble at one point in time for loading up Street Fighter V with mods installed. And let's just say he didn't have very family-friendly mods installed for Chun-Li at the time. And that made its way to the main stage. The same fighting game industry, where they banned players from using a certain outfit on a certain character because ESPN had an issue with it. So if they're trying to find their way into that same industry to get onto the big stage at EVO, do you think they're going to want to put a lot of the outfits they used to put in Dead or Alive games in this new one? Now, people tried to say that because they were so prominently putting tickle bitties on the screen in this trailer like they did here, that was them learning their lesson. That don't mean shit. This don't mean shit. There's a term out there that people are starting to use these days in regards to stuff like this where they call it safe horny. Meaning, yeah, it's a little horny, but it's horny within specific guidelines that people consider safe. Especially considering when this comes from a developer that used to have skins for characters that was them just wearing police tape. Now, you know for damn sure that a police tape skin is not going to make its way on the main stage at EVO. If they were to do that again, which I know they won't, because this is not the same Team Ninja that existed all those years ago. However, this is the same studio that continues to make games like Dead or Alive Extreme, which was an offshoot of the games of the series Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. But they stopped releasing those in the West after Dead or Alive Extreme Beach 2. Why? Because people in the West complain too much about objectification of female characters. That's the reason why you can't buy games like Dead or Alive Extreme or Dead or Alive Extreme Venus Prism. None of those games are sold here in the West. If you want to buy those games, you got to import them. The crazy thing is that a lot of those games have already been localized in English for the Southeast Asia region, which is where you have to import them from. You can't buy them here. When Venus Prism came out, a lot of people were wondering why the hell that game wasn't sold in the West. The reason why it's no longer sold in the West is looking at you right now in this picture. This is why they don't sell those games in the West anymore. They didn't stop making them. They just said, fuck you. So with that in mind, do you honestly think Dead or Alive 7 is going to continue to be what Dead or Alive used to be? That unapologetic franchise that didn't give a shit about what you thought about its female character designs at all? Because while people tend to associate Dead or Alive with just being the Tickle Bitties video game, as somebody who has played a lot of them from back in the day, there's actually a really good fighting game underneath all of that. Keep in mind, this was the same team that made Ninja Gaiden. So of course they know how this shit works. Of course they know how to make a good video game. So what you're saying, Neil ruined Breath for the West? Pretty much. Pretty much. Neil and those of his ilk have ruined stuff like this ever coming to the West. And it's part of the reason why Dead or Alive went so dormant for so long. It's been a long time since a new one. They kept making the spin-offs like Dead or Alive Extreme, and that was all they did. And those games never came to the West. But a new Dead or Alive itself, a new Dead or Alive fighting game, it was a long time since this happened. I see in the chat someone saying about Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade is the only reason why Dead or Alive is back. But Stellar Blade was also unapologetic about its character designs, and it didn't give a fuck about what you thought. You're dealing with a company who got just a little bit squeamish because somebody at a GDC said that their character was too skimpy. They got a little bit of pushback from a bunch of fucking HR Karens and male feminists, and they folded immediately. Whereas Korea was like, nah, this is what our game is, and if you don't like it, too damn bad. Unapologetic, meaning very apologetic. Almost as if they have some sort of collective guilt about what they're ashamed of what their franchises used to be. And that's kind of the big thing about the gaming industry as a whole, which is also going to lead me into my last segment here. Because not only was Dead or Alive revealed during the State of Play, the final reveal came in the form of a God of War Trilogy Remake. Not remaster, because they already did that. A remake of the original God of War Trilogy. Now, the thing about the original God of War Trilogy is that it was very known for being unapologetic about what that game was, the story it was trying to tell, and the people who made it. From God of War 1 all the way to God of War 3. And anybody who has played those games knows exactly what I mean by unapologetic. However, the Santa Monica of today is not the Santa Monica of 2005. The studio that made those original games. That's not who they are today. Much of those people are already gone. David Jaffe was who's the one who started God of War in the first place. He's not there anymore. He left after God of War 1. Some will say he hasn't made a good game since, but he's the one who started it off. So I was surprised what was in that game as a child. So was I. I was in high school when that game came out. That was like, I remember the story of me in God of War dates back to like 2004 when I went to GameStop to pre-order Kingdom Hearts 2. And they had a little CRT on the counter, and they had a demo of God of War on that CRT. And the clerk said, "Oh, we have a bunch of games coming out. You should probably have you heard of God of War?" And I was like, "No, I haven't heard of that at all." He was like, "Well, we got a demo right here on the desk if you want to check it out." And I was like, "All right, sure, I'll check it out." So I played it, that little demo, and fucking fell in love with it. And I was like, so when is this coming out? He was like, "You want to put a pre-order down on it?" I was like, "Sure." And so I did. $5 down on God of War. One of the best decisions I ever made when it comes to pre-order games. And all because I played a demo and was blown away by it. That was the one time GameStop trying to sell me on something actually worked. And paid off. And I loved it so much that I forced my then girlfriend at the time to play through it herself. And I helped her play through it. And she loved it. And when you think about some of the shit that's in that game, you'd be like, damn, how the hell did you get a woman to play this game and like it? But yeah, that was God of War in a nutshell. It was a very unapologetic franchise. From the violence, the gore, the story it was trying to tell, and yes, even the sex minigames. In an industry that has been trying to predicate itself on the idea of, oh, well, the industry needs to grow up. Video games need to grow up. Video games are different now. Gamers are over. Your audience doesn't have to be gamers. What do you mean? Or coming from the very guy you see on your screen in the far left corner there at the bottom, who went out of his way during the development of The Last of Us to say that we don't like to use fun in the studio when designing our games. Like, you don't what? The very same guy who went on this tirade to shame developers for making characters like the ones you see on screen right now. The very things that led to the industry that we see today. So as you can imagine, people have also picked up on this as well. And they are very concerned about these remakes. Now, we don't know the extent to which these games are being remade. If these are full-on reimaginings of the original trilogy or faithful adaptations of what that was. Either way, it's never going to be fully faithful to what they were, because I can almost guarantee you there's going to be a lot of shit that's removed from those games that the overly sensitive and very apologetic developers of today will remove. Not just the sex minigames, but the violence as well. Anybody who's played those original God of War games knows that Kratos was not trying to be a hero. In a world today where the idea of taking revenge is never worth it. No, vengeance is not worth it. Revenge is never worth it. And you intend to bring back a franchise where its entire premise was predicated on revenge and vengeance? And you think that's going to hold up today? You trust these people to make a game like that today? And to be fair, I'm not saying that Santa Monica was technically the Santa Monica of today is technically ashamed of who Kratos was back then. In fact, there is a segment in God of War, the 2018 God of War, where you're in the boat with Mimir and you're talking about, and he asks Kratos about his past and why he killed, not why, but he asked him, the story that led to him killing the Greek gods. And when Kratos tells him that story, Mimir literally says, the Greek gods were assholes and they had it coming.
From the hip of the bloody ghost of Sparta.
Do not call me that.
What? Don't mistake me, brother. From what I heard, the Pantheon had it coming. Stop.
So it's not like they were necessarily ashamed of that, but that was 2018. That was the sad dad God of War games, which I enjoyed, by the way. I'm not writing those games off as something that I hated. I enjoyed 2018. I enjoyed Ragnarok. But those games, if you were to ask me to compare those games with the original trilogy, I would say they are pale imitations of what the original games were. Not just in story, but in scale as well. The only thing big in the sad dad games was the World Serpent. The God of War trilogy was all about scale. And it was impressive that they pulled that off, especially when the first two games were only on the PS2. I remember to this day, my mind still has a perfect visage of the island that you go to in God of War 2, where once you get past the island, you go out to the sea and you walk across a chain, and that chain is hooked to 4 giant horses the size of the island itself. And your goal is to get them to drag you drag one island to another by getting the horses to move and drag those islands to each other. Like, that was the idea of scale in that game. And they did a fantastic job of portraying that. You got nothing of that in the recent games. A lot of people were questioning whether or not they would do the old school camera, which was the static camera that the old God of War games had, or to do the over-the-shoulder, aka second to third person camera that they have in the sad dad God of War games. And honestly, I kind of want them to go back to the classic camera, because those God of War games back then, they were fast-paced. They were very gory and very fast-paced compared to the recent ones. And the last thing I need is to see Kratos whipping those chains around and spinning around like he used to do back then, with that camera perspective that they use in the sad dad games. I don't think that works that well. Like, when you play the recent games, you do get the Blades of Chaos back, or the Blades of Exile back. But he clearly doesn't have all the moves he had back then. And I imagine there was a reason for that. There's a lot of shit you can do in those previous games that you can't do in the recent one. Plus, there was a lot of platforming in the original trilogy as well. Did you imagine having to do all that platforming with that camera perspective in the sad dad games? Just think about that. So the reality is that the return of a lot of these franchises, on surface level, seems like a good idea. But if you've been paying attention to the gaming industry for the past 10 years and how so much of it has shifted and not for the better, this should concern you, especially if you were fans of these franchises before. Because there is no way they're going to bring these games back and have them live up to what they used to be. In Dead or Alive's case, you might get something that looks relatively close to that. It might even get 90% of the way there. But do not be fooled. That is the hook they're going to use to get you on board. These studios are not who they used to be. And if they're not who they used to be, there's no way they can faithfully recreate or give these franchises justice the way they used to. And that is why people are concerned about both of them. So they're making games without having everything in it. Yeah, it's par for the course. Like you look at Suicide Squad, for example. People were excited about that because they believed that the Rocksteady that made the original trilogy of the Batman Arkham games was the Rocksteady of what was the same Rocksteady making Suicide Squad. Only for that game to then come out and people to find out that was very much not the case. These studios are who they were in name only. It's the ship is Theseus all over again. Does that mean I'm going to write a game like Dead or Alive 7 off completely? If the gameplay is good? Of course not. But if you think for a second that these franchises coming back is not predicated on the idea of them trying to win back old fans, then you'd be a fool for thinking so. Because a lot of this is indeed trying to play on nostalgia. But the mistake they make is thinking that gamers don't remember what these games were and who was making them. And if you make the decision to not live up to what we remember what these games used to be, then don't be surprised when we call you out on it when they don't live up to those expectations. These were bold choices. God of War and Dead or Alive. But anyways, that's all I got for now. Hate to get on the negative discourse about a lot of this stuff like this, but man, I'm telling you, you don't realize how passionate you are about a franchise or video games as a whole until stuff like this starts happening. And you realize like, holy shit, I really did care about these franchises a lot. I care about these video games more than I thought I did. And looking at Quiet, I'll never forget the interview we did on the codec with Stephanie herself, who was the model they used for Quiet, where I asked her what she thought about the discourse around the sexualization of her character. And she gave me a pretty basic answer about that. She kind of defended it, but kind of not at the same time. It was a very middle of the road answer. And do you know that all of these journalist websites, your Eurogamers, your IGNs, your GameSpots, they tried to give her shit for that. I'll never forget that. They gave her so much shit for that. That was crazy. You had a woman literally of her own volition choosing to be the model for this character. She didn't have to. She could have turned it down if she wanted to. And you weren't even satisfied with that. And you wonder why people say you can't hate journalists enough. Now, how much you want to bet that when these games come out and they have relatively sexy skins like Dead or Alive, for example, you'll get the very same people at these companies saying like, oh no, we never had a problem with these characters looking sexy at all. That's just made up news. We never had a problem with that. What do you mean? How do I know that? Because they pulled the same shit with Stellar Blade. Before Stellar Blade came out, they were losing their collective shit. Oh my God, how dare they put her in these outfits? These design looks like it was made by somebody who's never seen a woman in their life. Keeping in mind that the character was designed by the wife of the CEO of the company. Fast forward to today, and now they try to pretend that they never had an issue with her design. Like the complaints never happened. They tried to memory hole it. And I guarantee you they will continue to pretend that never happened when the sequel comes out. That's what your industry is. That's who the people are that claim they represent you and your taste in video games. Luckily for us is that they are continuing to lose relevance today. The problem is that developers are slow to realize that. And I can't say all of them are waking up to it. People are going to use Dead or Alive, the next Dead or Alive, as a litmus test to determine whether or not developers are learning a lesson. Or whether or not Team Ninja is learning from their mistakes. And you know what? I don't blame them for doing so. So that's where we are today, folks. That's video games as a whole right now. Those are the concerns that people have with Dead or Alive, with God of War, how people feel about Highguard, and I'm sure we'll be hearing about that shutting down soon. The sad thing is that most of it's in the West. The only concern we have with Dead or Alive, but like the only Eastern game here is Dead or Alive. That's just one. Talks about 3 games here. 2 of them from the West. Like I said during the last episode, as awful as it is to say, the beatings will continue until morale improves. And by beatings, I mean layoffs. Dark times for the Western industry. Let's put it that way, because the East is booming right now. And if I was a studio in the East, whether it be China, Korea, or Japan, I would be taking advantage of this as much as I possibly can. this is a strike while the iron is hot situation right now, because there is a demand for this to come back. The problem is that there are people out there that are too scared to bring it back. Is gaming healing? No one knows. Only time will tell. Until then, we'll have to wait and see. With that being said, that's all I got for today, folks. I'm going to wrap it up here. I'm going to go ahead and get some food and spend some time with the Grams, because it is her birthday today, like I mentioned earlier, and I want to spend as much time with her as I possibly can. So thank you all for watching. For those of you who caught it live, I'll have this archive up on YouTube as well for those who want to listen to my ramblings about this shit, or who enjoy my ramblings and rantings about this shit. Or for those of you who want to catch it from the beginning and find out what you missed, that'll also be there as well. It's going to take a little bit longer to get this posted up on YouTube, considering I'm not streaming live on YouTube as well right now. I'm going to try to edit this thing down with better microphone audio, since I'm recording this via microphone or with a sample application as well. So just be patient. Give me time. It's going to take some time to get this thing edited and put up, but I'll try to get it up as soon as possibly can. In the meantime, guys, you all have a wonderful day or night, depending on where you are in the world. You all stay classy, stay sharp. Do not do anything that I wouldn't do, and I will see you guys probably next week. You guys have a good one. Love you all. I am out of here. Deuces. And my stream deck is not working. Fade to black.